Hi, and welcome to the Nonprofit Matters podcast, brought to you by #Nonprofit, the show where we tackle real, complex, and often unspoken challenges of working in South Africa's nonprofit sector. From ethical dilemmas and leadership struggles, to funding cuts, legal hurdles, and burnout, this is a space for honest conversation about what it really takes to keep doing good. This podcast is made possible thanks to the generous support of the LV and Ivy Middleton Charitable Trust. We're grateful for their partnership in helping us create a platform where the sector can reflect, share, and find new ways forward.
Hi, and welcome to the Nonprofit Matters podcast. I'm your host for this episode, Ruen Govinder, and I'm the Executive Director of #Nonprofit. Today, our topic is Burnout is not part of the job, mental health in the nonprofit sector. Joining me is Mpadi Makgalo, Executive Director of HEAL SA, and we have Cassey Chambers from South African Depression and Anxiety Group, and she's the Operations Director there. So as we get started, I'm going to give you both a chance to introduce yourselves. Mpadi, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Hello, good morning, Ruen. Thank you for having me, and good afternoon to your guest. My name is Mpadi Makgalo. I am the founder and CEO of HEAL SA. HEAL South Africa is an organization that helps young people with mental health support. We work with universities, with high schools, and unemployed youth. And we offer teletherapy, we offer mental health support groups, and we also offer advocacy and awareness campaigns within the community, because we believe that healing does not happen in isolation. We live in communities, and those communities have to be aware of what it is that's going on in terms of mental health. And thank you for having me.
Cassey?
Hi everyone. I'm Cassey Chambers, the Operations Director at the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. We're a passionate NGO that's been around for 30 years making mental health matter. Through our helplines, we have over 30 helplines that provide free telephone counseling. And at the moment, we get over 3,000 calls per day from people around the country of all ages, races, genders, backgrounds, who are really struggling with mental health issues. And over the years, creating awareness through press and media, school outreach, rural outreach, corporate wellness, doing whatever we can to make sure that mental health matters. We have amazing 300 volunteers who help us do what we do, and over 200 free support groups around the country that tackle all kinds of issues around mental health. And I think being an NGO, we really understand the different types of issues that so many people are dealing with every single day.
Thank you both. You're representing such fantastic organizations doing amazing work. So I can't wait to actually get into the conversation. We've compiled some questions that have come through from the nonprofit community. And I think you'll find as we go through these that there are issues that are common and resonate with, honestly, just way too many people working in the nonprofit sector. So here's our first question. I started this job because I believed in the mission, but somewhere along the way, passion turned into pressure. Everyone is running on fumes, and there's this unspoken culture that needing rest means you're not committed enough. People look at you funny if you leave at 5 p.m., even though that's what our contracts say, or if you actually take a proper lunch break instead of eating at your desk while you're working. I feel constant pressure to prove I care by pushing myself to the edge, and it's wearing me down. How do we shift this toxic culture so that taking care of ourselves isn't seen as a weakness, but as a necessary part of how we function? So let's start that one with Cassey. Can you share your thoughts on this?
We've heard this so often, and I think not just in the NPO sector, but even in the corporate sector, is that we have this very toxic culture of where you have to work harder and longer and be stressed all the time. And I think especially post-COVID, when we had even limited resources, there were a lot of staff that were leaving, our organizations that had to close a lot of the work that they were doing on the ground. It's almost been the norm, and that culture of working longer, harder, not having those boundaries. And I know that even in our organization, these are things that have been around for such a long time, because as NGOs, we have less resources, less people, so we have to work harder, do more with less. and at the expense of our own mental health and often physical health. I think what we often see is that people in the NPO sector who are then leading to burnout, who are leading to overwhelming levels of stress, it's only when their body physically shuts down do they then have to really slow down and take that break. And I think for so many organizations, for way too long, we have that stress mentality that it's good to be really busy, working after hours, working weekends, never stopping, at the expense of the actual individual. And we've seen a lot of NGO workers, staff who've been in the field for many, many years who physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually burn out and can't do it anymore. And I think it's having to really shift that mindset, shift that conversation, shift the culture of NGOs in South Africa, where we have to prioritize mental health. And I think this is also evident is that corporates and companies, big corporations, have something like an employee assistance program where it's the norm. You have this in place. There's an HR department. Most NGOs in South Africa are too small to have an HR department. Whenever there is funding that should be invested towards an EAP or an employee wellness, that's seen as a luxury. That's normally used for project costs or running costs as simple as electricity and printing and paper. And I think we've had to shift that. We don't often see people working in the NGO sector as if it was any other corporate client or corporate organization having to look after the mental health of employees. And I think that's why even something like Empower, which SADAG launched during COVID, to make sure that we actually focus on the mental health for free, the mental health of NGO workers. But I think for the individual who's reaching out, there's so much that we can relate to working in the NGO sector. And I think it starts with us first to start making that change, is not waiting for an organization or a team to make that change, but changing it in ourselves first, making sure that we're prioritizing our mental health and that we take away that guilt. Because if we don't look after ourselves, we can't look after other people and do the work that we do. We've heard that saying all too much when you're on an airplane, put your own oxygen mask on first before you put on a child or your passenger. And I think as people who work in the NGO sector, it's always selfless. It's not about me. It's about other people's struggles. And we're having to shift that, because if we don't look after ourselves, if we don't start putting in those boundaries and prioritizing our own physical and mental health, we can't help other people. And I think that's the culture that we're having to change.
Thanks, Cassey. That's such a good point. I mean, we can't keep burning ourselves out and saying we're waiting for the culture to change. We can actually make those changes ourselves and set those boundaries for ourselves and set the example for other people.
And I just want to add to that as well, is that we have this culture where it's almost like a badge of honor if you are stressed and burnt out. And especially in the NGO sectors, you want to kind of prove like I'm working the hardest than anyone else out there. We're doing more with less resources. And I think we have to change that as well, is that stress and burnout is not a badge of honor. Stress and burnout tells us that we're not looking after ourselves. And I think that's some of the key conversations that have to change.
Absolutely. Mpadi, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
I think Cassey just put it so nicely. I think I'm just gonna get into the personal take, and I think as a Black woman, you grew up seeing your mother working themselves till dusk. You saw your grandmother doing that, and I think there is something that we take on as Black women too, to say, my worth is based on the amount of time that I work, and the more I work, the more I'm appreciated, and the more I'm seen, the more I am acknowledged and received and all that. And I think, and that's what actually attracts us to this industry, to be in the development industry, in the mental health industry. But it is, I think, Cassey said it very well. There is no badge of honor in you not feeling well and still trying to help somebody else. And I'm very, I think I turned 50 this year and I took it up on myself to say, if I don't take care of myself, I'm going out. Like I have to be, it's something that we we take very seriously at HealSA. I think to a point where we actually have to get somebody to talk to our counselors and our social workers to actually say, taking good care of yourself is not, it's actually a necessary component of the work that you do. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. But I see how even the young people that are coming to our organization, they come with that. Say, you know what, I gotta, yes, give it my all, but go beyond and above, and it's not healthy, as you can imagine. But it's something that I have to consciously myself work on and remind myself. I mean, I was up this morning at 4:00 in the morning because I had so much, deadlines and I had this, and I was nervous about, this but it's we have somehow made it okay, but it's a balance, and it's something that I'm learning. I'm not there yet. I'm still learning how to not get myself there.
It's such a good point, Mpadi, is that it's not just the workplace culture, but we're also bringing in our family culture and our mothers and our the cultural context in which we live at home, and it all melds into how we are functioning in the workplace, and it's often it comes out in very unhealthy ways, and setting those boundaries and being conscious of those choices that we make is really challenging.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Ruen. But I think what it is, as I was reflecting on this topic today, we've normalized it. I think whether it's corporate or whether it's, I have friends who are investment bankers, and I mean, it's almost like a badge of honor. You calling me at your offices at 10:00 and say you're still at the office, or you are on your computer, or you whatever. It's like, wow, he's working so hard. And I think there is in society, we have this whole, matrix of saying, you're working too hard, and, then you get acknowledgement, or you get compensated for that. But I think we are now in the industry, or in a mode of working smart, finding ways to be able to attain whatever goals you have, but also taking care of yourself in that process.
And I'd love to add on that, Mpadi, was so true, is that we've normalized it to such a point where it's dysfunctional. And I think it's a practice. There are days where we're really good at looking after our mental health as an individual or as a team. And some days, especially when you have deadlines, we can kind of fall off track. And I think it's also just about being gentle and saying, well, every single day being really intentional. What are we as a team doing? And I think it starts with us and role modeling that. And having that conversation and putting in those boundaries, which, trust me, is so hard when you're leading a team or an organization, right? And it's so based on performance, but it's having to do simple things like in a meeting, it's doing a mental health check-in first. We have so many different WhatsApp groups, so using that as a way to share tips and tools of how to switch off after work, or how to de-stress over the weekend. Using those kinds of tools to start changing that culture, because it doesn't just happen overnight. We're deconstructing years and years of toxic stress, which we've normalized. And I think it is about role modeling that, so we've looked at things like not messaging after hours, unless it's an emergency, right? Allowing people to totally switch off on weekends, encouraging them to take leave days, finding that balance. And I think it's really hard because we're so used to pushing and going and doing more, but it's having to actually make that really intentional and really important. But it is a practice. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't, but we make that effort every day. And I think within the teams is we also then celebrate them when that happens, to actually acknowledge. And I think this also talks to the stigma where we ourselves judge what we do and judge what other people do. So we're so aware if someone takes lunch off, right? Or is leaving early for their mental health, or has to go for counseling. And I think it's changing that to actually celebrate it and shift. But I think it's a practice, and it's something that we're having to deconstruct and really be intentional with.
Yeah. It's so funny as you're speaking. I mean, one of the things that I remember, we just had a meeting last week, actually not this week. We just had a meeting this morning with my team. And last week they were asking me, why are you not applying to certain funders? And I said, because I've been funded by them before, and I know the stress that it comes with having their funds. And I'm very intentional to say, I don't want to be called after 8. I don't want to, how we relate is about numbers and no longer, our purpose and what we have put forward, as he is saying. And I'm very intentional about not having that, because to be honest, Cassey, I think where we sit, part of our stress is like, we have a funder that you need to make sure that you deliver. And if they are hard on you, and I've had those ones, and I'm like, no, we are not moving in that way, and I'm going to safeguard. I choose to safeguard my team, because I don't want now to be relating in a manner that no longer espouses mental wellness. And I'm very intentional about that.
That is fantastic, Mpadi, and that is amazing to hear, because I think that would resonate very strongly. I mean, the burdens come, we have an obvious, stress in dealing with communities in need and all of that, but the acknowledgement that the stresses also come from people like the donors, and the pressure they put on us, and that does exacerbate an already difficult situation. And I think that takes us nicely into the next question, because we've talked about setting boundaries in the workplace, but what about when it's the work itself that's impacting you? So in this question, someone says, I work in animal welfare, but over time I've realized we can't help animals without also helping the people who care for them. How do you feed a starving dog when the family who owns the dog is also starving? We started a feeding program for the community too, because how could we not? But no matter what we do, it never feels enough. Every time we respond to one crisis, another one surfaces. Hunger, unemployment, trauma, neglect. I lie awake wondering if we've done enough, and it breaks my heart that people still think that we just care about animals and we don't care about people. They don't see the full picture. How do you keep doing this work without losing yourself in the sadness?
I love that question so much. We were privileged not too long ago to get an award with Aspen. We got some funding from Aspen. We are acknowledged for the work that we do in terms of mental health. And one of the conversations that I was part of was that intersectionality. And I think there was a gentleman from Venezuela that spoke, who was also one of the awardees, and was saying, we cannot longer look at development issues in isolation. We have a gender-based violence mental health program, but in it, we have women that says, but I can't leave because it's finances. So where is the economic upliftment in that? And then we have other women that say, but I need education for me to leave this man. And you look at that, and I'm so clear and so emboldened in my understanding of development. And I've been in this space for over 20 years. To say this isolation working is what's killing us. And for somebody to just look at one thing and not see the intersectionality of it all. And sometimes funders do force that upon us, in a good way and sometimes in a bad way. But I was privy to be invited to the G20 meeting, at the Kirstenbosch about, 2-3 months ago. And they had a lady from the Ban Ki-moon Foundation, the executive director, and it said, something very powerful to say. Actually, we should no longer be sending out RPA, request for proposal. We should actually be asking organization to say, given what you do, what do you propose that we should fund? And I think for me, it talks to what you're talking about. Say, now I don't see myself as just feeding the dogs and not, what's my, imperative right now? Who do I need to take? Because now as an organization, you'll be saying, okay, with what my community needs, we actually need to have connected to HealSA that now talks to, families that can afford, they have issues with food and the dogs, and so it then becomes an integrated way of support. And it's still, Ruen, is still new in my mind, but it's something that I still like. We need to look at it in South Africa, because we are so much in silos in the way that we fund, so much in silos in the way that we deliver our services. We cut people off, and then we become I always say our sector is a dog eat dog. Like, we don't see ourselves as working together and it's because it has to do with the way we are funded. To say now, if I collaborate with SADAG, I might not be getting money. You know what I mean? Like if I collaborate, then it means, less funding for me. And we need to have that type of funding that talks to or support or services that actually works in collaboration with other related issues, so that we don't see one as being bigger than the other matter.
So true. And I'd love to also add to that, because I think we see this so often, is that the work, as people working on the front line, it's heartbreaking. Nothing happens in isolation, even if you're dealing with children or animals or emergency crisis situations or natural disasters or agriculture. I think seeing it firsthand, and we forget that when you're meeting and working in communities, you're on the ground. So all your senses are activated, right? It's the stories, it's the voices, it's the heartache. And we kind of absorb that trauma, and we go home because of the people that we are and serving in this community. That kind of stuff moves us, and it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because that movement, that impact it has, actually motivates us to do more. But when you're often surrounded by heaviness and constantly going in and dealing with this day to day, it does become too much. And I think it's also important for whatever sector people work in the NGO sector, is to know that this has an impact, that trauma has an impact. Our bodies absorb it, our mental health, and we almost have to work harder in making sure that we're doing things like trauma debriefing. And you would probably think, how can someone working in the animal sector, get trauma debriefing? Or how would that help them? But when you're doing this kind of work and seeing the hardships firsthand, and you're seeing families that you're thinking, how are they going to eat? And we have this even on our suicide helpline, is that we're speaking to people who are dealing with such heavy problems and issues, and each call is different. And we often wonder after a call, are they going to be okay? Are they going to? And I think it's that not knowing and the what if, that's so hard. But trauma debriefing is so critical. Having a support system where you can talk to and unpack the day, processing a lot of that trauma is so critical. Finding that support circle, finding that within your teams as well. But we also have to counter it, is that from all the hardships we see, we have to fill our cup even more. So we have to make sure that we're relaxing. We have to make sure that we're having deep, meaningful connections with family and friends. So doing more things that fill our cup, going outside, getting fresh air, going on for walks, taking breaks from digital detox. All of these things are small coping tools that we can do to really help our bodies to cope with the kind of work that we need to do. I think as NGOs, also with the work that we're doing, whether it be feeding schemes or children, they're heartbreaking, and there's such a desperation because more needs to be done. We often are so focused on the problems, the things that are not working, the heartache. We have to celebrate the wins. And we try to do this within our teams at the end of every day, is that we're celebrating what did work. Because we can probably list 10 or 20 things of what didn't work, but we have to focus on what did win. So celebrating those wins are really crucial. It also helps us to focus, what is the thing that we're doing? What is the impact? What is the change? And even recording that, at the end of the week, having a look what we've done this week. What was your favorite photo from the work that really, resonated with you? So I think we often have to counter by doing so much more to help balance the hardships that we're dealing firsthand on the ground.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point of understanding the intersectionality, that no matter what space you're in the nonprofit sector, all of these impact on our society as a whole. They're all connected. They all impact on each other. But at the same time, the self-care and the deliberate actions in an organization of ensuring that you are not only focusing on the problem is so crucial, because, and this is, we had so many questions in this vein of people feeling just overwhelmed. So I'm going to go into a question that is actually very similar to what we've been talking about, but this speaks a little bit more to the community-based organizations where there isn't an infrastructure, there isn't necessarily an office, there isn't necessarily a support team. But these are crucial people working in the nonprofit sector. So this person says, I started a small soup kitchen to help people in my community. Just something simple from the heart. But then someone needed help getting school uniforms for their kids. Another needed help applying for an ID. Then they brought their friends and their families. And now I'm being asked to help with rent, electricity, transport, groceries. The list just keeps growing. They think I'm rich. I'm not. I'm just someone trying to help. I care deeply about every single person who comes to me, and I know their needs are real. But I'm overwhelmed and I'm starting to feel taken advantage of. And at the same time, I feel so guilty even thinking that. How do I set boundaries without hardening my heart? How do I keep showing up for people but also protecting myself?
Yes. And I think this is the most human person that I know. Like, I think it's all of us who are in this industry. I mean, that's what we see all the time. And I think for me, I was very clear about my North Star, and my North Star is somebody who's dealt with mental health and that, went through my own journey with mental health. It is center in terms of when I think about, what is it that I want to give back to the world? What is it that I want to do? It's around mental health. I do not negate other needs that people have, but I'm very clear about, I hear you might, and we live in a country and, a nation that is where service delivery is still a problem, where services are not provided as they should, because we shouldn't be using our own, all these things that the writer spoke about. They should be made possible. And it's just that we do have systems that are not quite working within our nation. But I think it's very much, and it's sometimes it's very, it's as if you don't care, but I think you realize this is what this is my North Star. This is what my focus is right now. And this is where I can refer you to get support. But it was hard for me to do that because I'm a people pleaser. I think part of what brings us into this space is because we like people and we like to be liked, and we don't talk about that much, but that's what it is. But I think it took me a few emotional muscles for me to gather to just say, I hear you, and here are the referrals. This is where you can go. And I do understand the person is not an organization; it's a person doing this on her own. But I think to be very, very vital and very clear. I remember going to see Oprah in some of these talk whatever. And she said something very profound. That's when she was studying her school in Johannesburg. And they were like, oh, why are you not doing this in America? And she was like, my heart is in Africa, and I want to empower a young child in South Africa. And that's where I am. And she got all that criticism. But hey, we have the same problem in America. Why are you not helping America? It's like, but this is where it is. And being very clear and being very intentional about what it is that she wants to do. And I think for me, that also applies to the person that wrote in to say, in your way of helping, have something that I think one of the things that funders have taught us to say, what's the impact that you want to see? What's the impact that you want to see? Yes, you can do everything else, but what is it that you can do so well that in 10 years time, in 5 years time, in 3 years time, you can say, in my community, I was able to uplift A. What is that A? Or X?
So true. I'd love to echo that because I think that clear is kind. And often, again, in the working sector, you mentioned it so perfectly, is that we don't want to say no to people. We want to help. Our heart doesn't have boundaries, right? And we get something out of it as well. We feel good if we can help other people. But in today's society and across the world, that list can get very, very long. We've heard if you give a hand, they'll take an arm. And it's because we want to give. And I think that motivation is good, that heart is good, but also clear is kind. And it's interesting as well that the minute we're talking boundaries or having to say no, we use words like hardening and disappointing people. And it's actually not, because other people are very good at saying no to us. As Mpadi mentioned, funders are very happy. Clients are very happy to say no. Us in the NGO sector are also allowed to say no. And I think this is also really helpful, is that we often don't prep for those kinds of conversations because it's not part of our culture, our language. but actually prepping, how would you respond if someone says, oh, thanks for that electricity, but this neighbor also needs, and this one needs, and this one needs, right? And it's also that other person is thinking, here is someone who can help me. Maybe they do have the answers, but they're not putting all the eggs in one basket thinking you're going to save them. And I think it's also that savior mentality that we have in that NGO sector, that it's us or no one. So saying no is okay, but starting that script in our head of saying, I'd really love to help you with that, but I can't right now. But what I can do is X. And practicing that so we get used to saying it in those situations. Because I know it's like no one likes that silence, right? That empty space. So we fill it. We want to people please. We want to fix a problem. We're problem solvers, but it doesn't always have to be us. So this person who has got such an amazing heart, and I think, again, so many companies and big corporations and departments forget the person on the ground who's going door to door to helping just the people in their street. They're doing amazing work, but they also can't do it alone. Just like us NGOs, we're talking about collaboration, breaking the silos. I'd love to say to this person is she doesn't have to have all the answers. Maybe it could be linking them to resources. So building her village to help other people. So starting or practicing a script and saying no is okay. Setting in those boundaries means that you're able to link that person to help. And clear is kind. But I really want to challenge us on how we're speaking, that the minute we're talking about putting in boundaries or having to tell someone no, it's not because we don't care or that we're hardening. It's also we're just being realistic. What can we do versus what can't we do? And maybe what we can't do right now, and creating that support because we can't do it alone.
Thank you, Cassey and Mpadi. There's just so much to unpack there. The savior complex that drives the sector, and how damaging that is, that it's okay to say no as nonprofits. I've worked with so many organizations where a mission creep happens, right? They have a core mission, they're very focused, and then there's another need, and there's another need. And before you know it, they're, spent down the entire budget because they're trying to help everyone do everything, and then they can do nothing. And then they're scaling down, retrenching staff. I mean, it's way too common. And it's way too damaging, not just for the staff, but for the sustainability of the organization. And so when it's one person who's trying to help, it is not possible to be all things to all people. You can't pour from an empty cup. You have to put on your own air mask first before you can help other people. Such important lessons, but lessons that we have to keep repeating and practicing ourselves.
But I think it's also so crucial in creating an analogy, because in the NGO sector, we see ourselves so separate in just having to give and be everything to everyone. Like you said, we have a saying, only do what only you can do. And I think there's power in that. If you're only a facilitator, if you can only help with this, that's okay. That is your superpower. It's the same way as that you wouldn't go to a doctor and also assume that they're going to be a plumber and fix your pipes and also do your accounting and then drive you somewhere else. And however, in the NGO sector, we're supposed to wear all the hats and be everyone to everything. And I think it's also just to break that down and have a conversation first on what can I do? What am I good at? What is my skill? And like Mpadi said, what is the impact that you're wanting to see? And I think it talks about just having a plan and a conversation before you go into those situations, because it's a lot harder to say no when you're in front of someone who's asking you for this. And I think it's just about thinking about what we're wanting to do. How can we do that? And only doing what only you can do.
And I think to add to that, is a lot of, there's so many people who have an idea or see a problem that needs to be fixed, and they decide that they have all the answers, and they need to now start an NGO, to fix this problem but they do this without actually looking at, how am I actually going to pay for this? How is this going to work? Do I really have the answers? How is this actually working on the ground? And how many other nonprofits are actually doing this already? Can I collaborate with somebody? Can I go help somebody who's already doing the work? And so many people take on the burden, particularly people outside of the sector who haven't been worn down and haven't seen the realities of actually working at an NGO and the complexities of running an NGO, and everything that goes with it, tend to come in very naively, very well intentioned. But it really, the problems are always so much bigger than you could possibly imagine. And we have, 300,000 registered nonprofits in the country. There's inevitably somebody else working in the space where even if they're not working in your community, you can learn from them. You can collaborate with them in some way, and you can use what's already there rather than trying to reinvent the wheel by yourself and then getting just completely worn out trying to do it.
I feel like that could be a whole podcast in itself. And it goes back, I'm referencing to Mpadi again, is that, it becomes that dog eat dog. It becomes this competition, right? Who can get funding? Who can do this better? And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's so many organizations. What we don't necessarily need in any sector is more NPOs popping up, but more the collaborations, more people working together. It's the humans behind the name that want to do things. But that could be a whole podcast series in itself. But I think it starts with breaking down those silos and barriers and working more together. It's so disheartening to see that there's so many NPOs that are registered and so many that are not compliant with the Department of Social Development. And they start all of this and then stop. And I think, being in the NGO sector is tough, but it's not having more NGOs and more NGO numbers, but really collaborating and building the work. So there's a challenge for us. Thanks, Ruen.
Absolutely. So that brings us to the end of today's conversations. And as we close, I'd like to ask each of you, what do you do personally to take care of yourself working in this incredibly challenging space? Mpadi, would you like to go first?
I moved, I'm in Cape Town now. I used to be in Joburg, and I think that just brought its own stresses. So managing an organization or leading an organization remotely has been a challenge. One of the things that have just really supported me in this process is yoga. I do yoga Mondays and Fridays. I do my hikes. Those are my go-to pills to get my mental health in a good state. I mean, I think in a week I'll probably do that 3 times. But also meditation. I take time before I get out of bed. I give myself 5-10 minutes, and if I can maybe 15 minutes to just sit with myself and just collect myself and have a pure intention for the day. And I also read. I really do love my reading. It helps me calm down. And nothing wrong with a glass of wine. I also have, once in a while, I'll have myself, I'm in the Cape now, nice, good a glass of red wine. That helps me a lot.
Cheers, Mpadi. That sounds fantastic. Cassey, what about you?
Oh, I love that. And I love also just having kind of this toolbox of different things. And I think what's so unique is you don't ever have to have just one. It's kind of seeing where you are. Maybe you need to do a lot of yoga. Maybe you need to do the yoga and the glass of wine and the bubble bath. Because I think it ebbs and flows. And sometimes we're really busy and it's having to check in and saying, actually, I need to go to bed early tonight. And I'm going to switch off and make sure that I'm in bed. And rest is really important to me because I have to work harder at refilling my battery so that I can show up the next day and be fully present. I also, exactly what Mpadi said, is that we have to be so intentional because I have to role model this to everyone else in the team as well. So for me, being able to switch off after hours or on weekends is really, really important. I'm also very lucky, blessed, grateful. I have 2 very busy girls and they fill up my cup. So it's doing the momming afterwards, running to different events. But it's those that really create that meaningful connection and fill up your cup so more. But I think definitely that rest and relaxation, and something that I'm practicing and trying harder is that digital detox. Because I think so much of our work is we're constantly on our phones. If we hear a beep, if we're staring at screens so often. And I am also a victim of doom scrolling, right? Because it's a way of escaping. It's a way of just seeing where people are traveling and what cool pictures and what celebrities are doing overseas. But it's also being aware and kind of checking in to say, okay, what have I done for half an hour? And I think it's just being super intentional and also gentle. Is that just giving myself grace and sometimes working on the basics. Did I get fresh air today? Did I eat today? Have I had enough water? So I often have this kind of list as a toolbox, because also when I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed, it's not like my first go-to to calm myself down, and being really intentional. And as someone in Joburg and Mpadi, I'm quite jealous that you've missed all the traffic, although Cape Town has its own traffic. I spend a lot of time in traffic with the commute. And before 5 or 10 years ago, I would have been so angry. And by the time I get to the office, I'm, really, really anxious. Whereas now I use that time really intentionally for podcasts. And by the time I get to the office, I'm as cool as a cucumber and I've heard some interesting things. So for me, those are my go-to. And sometimes I have to spice it up and change it up and do some things different. But it's just constantly working at it. Also for myself, life is short. Our work is hard. But the impact and the meaning is so important. So, yeah.
I love that, Cassey. And I think I love the idea of having a whole toolbox, a number of different things you can do to take care of yourself. Because when you get to that point of being so overwhelmed, self-care then actually becomes an additional stress of, oh gosh, it's another thing on my list I'm failing at. And it's just too much. So if you have this toolbox of things that are simple or complicated depending on how much time and energy you have, maybe it's just a bubble bath, maybe it's just step outside, take a deep breath and do a few yoga stretches. But to have just a whole list of things that you can pick out and say, okay, this is what I can manage now, and being intentional about it. So thank you both. This conversation, we can have, I think, a whole series of podcasts literally just on these topics that we touched on. There's so much to unpack, and your insights have been just brilliant. So thank you both for giving us your time and your insights. This episode was brought to you by #nonprofit with support from the LV and IV Middleton Charitable Trust, whose contribution makes this work possible. If you found this discussion helpful, please share it with your networks and keep an eye out for future episodes where we'll continue to explore the big questions facing our sector. Until next time, take care and thank you for all that you do.